Hi, my name is Fernanda Amaral, and first I wanted to thank you all for your time and also thank my friend and mentor, Professor Stuart Price, for the opportunity to be here today talking about my new book. So this is the book, Voices from the Favelas, Media Activism and Counter-Narratives from Below. And the first thing that I do in this book is bring some historical background to discuss the misrepresentation of the favelas throughout time. Because what happens in Brazil is that the favelas, they are seen not only in the mainstream media, but by society as well. As a general rule, they are seen as dangerous places, as places for criminals. And it has been like this for a long time. So in the first chapter of the book, I went back to the very emergence of the favelas and retraced this representation, showing that only a few years after the emergence of the first favelas, their image was already of a place for criminals and vagabonds. And that was linked to the very people living in the favela at that time. Former slaves, working class people that needed to be near the jobs in the city center but could not pay the high prices for the houses in the city center. So these people, the society already had prejudice against these people, and this prejudice transferred to the favelas, and the favelas started to be seen as places for criminals and vagabonds. So decades later, over a century later, this misrepresentation prevails. But now we start to see the counter-narratives from the residents against this misrepresentation, breaking the invisible walls of the favelas. Sometimes these walls are very visible, but that's another discussion. So for this discussion, we are talking about the walls that keep favela residents voiceless, that keep what happens inside the favelas, what keep the walls that keep narratives from favela residents inside the favelas. So for the first time, they are breaking these invisible walls and reaching the people in the formal city, reaching people outside the favelas. And you might be asking yourself, why only now? Did people in the favelas never tried to tell their own stories before? They never tried to defend themselves against police violence or against criminalization, against misrepresentation? Yes, they did. Of course they did. They tried. But before, the mainstream media had the monopoly of the information in a way that meant these people were voiceless. Their voices were not heard outside favelas, barring a few exceptional events. Journalists were constantly seen as a foreign view portraying the favela because they were portraying something that they did not understand, that they did not live, and they were not listening to the voices coming from the favelas. The residents, they saw the journalist as interested only in sell a story, but not in helping them to find a voice, to tell their own stories. So what changed? Well, with the popularization of the with the popularization of internet in the favelas from 2010, and especially through the recent massive popularization of smartphones, we started to see more favela residents reaching people while outside the favelas. We started to be able to see more and more presence. We started to be able to hear their voice more often. So in this book, I discuss two main points. The first one is the misrepresentation of the favelas in the mainstream media and its consequences, which are not limited to the stigma, to the difficulties that a favelado stigma can bring, but are much more raw and cruel, going as deep as in the legitimation and normalization of police violence, meaning favela residents are constantly the target of the police, and society will not speak up against it because of rooted prejudice because of a rooted discourse of criminalization of favelas and its residents. So the police will go inside the favelas and kill people, sometimes innocent people, many times innocent people, and the people outside the favela will not speak up against it because there's misconception, misrepresentation that if the police killed someone inside the favela is because that person was somehow involved in criminal activities. The other part of the book is focused on the counter-narratives coming from below, coming from the residents themselves. These residents turned activists, media activists, and more specifically, favela media activists. As my friend Leonardo Custodio defined very well in his book, favela media activism is the individual and collective contesting actions through and about media, deriving from and leading to the enactment of citizenship of among favela residents. So in this book, more than discuss activism itself, I discuss the impacts of the whole action of contesting, of producing counter-narratives, of seeking and somewhat finding a voice, and how this process is empowering favela residents, regardless of whether they are or not effective in influencing the official narrative yet. Because what started as the main point of this part of my investigation, that is finding out if they are or not effective in influencing the mainstream narrative, became just a part of it. And reading this book, you will realize, as I did, that the main point here are the transformations brought by the act of speaking up itself, the empowerment brought by protesting and taking the narratives to themselves. So, yes, I will tell you in the book if they are or not effective influencing the media narrative, how often they are able to influence the media narrative, and even how they are employing mastering techniques to be more and more effective doing that. But you will see, as I did, that this is not the major consequence of favela media activism. The major consequence of favela media activism is that through this contestation, these residents are finding their voice, are making their voice heard outside the favelas, are marking their space, enacting their citizenship. I need to remind you that we are talking about people who were denied a voice for over a century, who were relegated to the margins of society, had their basic rights disrespected in so many ways, and they are living at the margins of democracy. The democracy experienced inside the favelas is not the same democracy experienced outside. The democracy inside the favelas is much more cloudy. The lines separating what is right and wrong are foggy, are cloudy inside the favelas. And through this act of standing up and saying, hi, no, that's enough, we are now telling our own stories, they are taking their narratives back to them. And through this, they are enacting their citizenship. And this should be the major reflection for everyone looking into favela activism right now. Are they effective in influencing the mainstream media agenda? Yes, sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. But are they relevant, game-changing regarding how favela residents see themselves, speak up for themselves, fight for themselves? Yes, definitely. And that's why we need to be looking into this. So I think that's the main point discussed in the book. I'll keep it short, so I'll stop here. There's much more in the book there are thorough analysis of media coverage, very relevant discourse analysis of what is said in the media and what is said in social media by the residents themselves. Also, there's analysis of life in the favelas, discussing the stigma, the difficulties, and also finally there's a major comparative analysis between the work of media activism in the favelas, of media activists in the favelas, represented by 3 different groups, Coletivo Papo Reto, Voz da Comunidade, and Maravive. I hope this book can bring you the answers that you might be looking for, and also more questions as well, because that's the way we can continue to reflect and discuss voice poverty, violence, and activism in the global south, and especially in the favelas. So thank you very much for your time again.